Hey everyone, what's up? This is Uri for Guerrilla Poker, and today I'm going to be bringing you a pretty gangster hand played by the one and only Stefan112222, one of, if not the greatest poker player in the world right now, and definitely also one of the most interesting poker players to review, because this guy does some gangster stuff.
Now that's real gangster shit.
Hand is BVB, blinds are 5-10, folded to Stefan in the small blind, he raises to $30, standard raise size, and gets called by, we'll call him Pedro. We see a flop of Jack 8-4 two-tone. Here Stefan checks with the initiative, and it's always worth mentioning, what does this imply, right? Generally, the fact that you check with the initiative implies that you are playing a polarized c-betting strategy. So very different you often see on this channel where I say someone is betting 1/3 pot, he's probably betting his entire range. So Stefan, by checking here, is kind of telegraphing that he would probably play this board with a bigger size and split his range into a defensive part and an offensive part. Each one of these has kind of a, hands that make a ton of sense to be in it. We could go down a deep rabbit hole discussing that. But yeah, he checks. Pedro bets 1/4 pot, which Stefan's, defensive hands are probably fairly happy facing. So Stefan calls. Turn Queen of Hearts, and Stefan decides to lead out with a small donk bet. Now, what is Stefan trying to imply strategically by deciding to donk bet on this card? If you ask me, what he's saying is, when you bet so small, Pedro, I'm going to be calling you with hands like Ace Queen and King Queen. And these hands improve. I also have a bunch of Jacks and Eights. And I really feel like your small bet is kind of very weakish hands. It's not like you can really stab everything here, so I just feel like your range is, centered around protection. And I don't want to let you just, bet your pocket fives once and take it and then see the river, or bet your ace four once and see the river. I'm going to start charging you, and charging a very appropriate number for this kind of showdown bound range where you're just kind of trying to milk them for a little bit extra, not let them see the free cards, not narrow the range down. If Stefan had something that's going for stacks, he would have check raised. So here we're talking more about Stefan going for some thin value and protection with presumably a queen or a jack or maybe something like pocket nines. So Stefan bets small and Pedro raises. Now, what does this raise imply? It implies you are now not facing the part of my range that just wants to get to showdown. You ran into a landmine, which we can call, either something that decided to bluff, or the value part of my range that does want to build a big pot. And where the threshold for that lies, you guys will have to judge for yourselves, but a lot of the technique and the art in playing these spots is determining exactly where is the threshold. Are you going to raise Jack 10? Maybe sometimes. Are you going to raise 10-9? Definitely. What about Queen 5? What about Ace Jack? So these are questions you need to ask yourself. Looking at this size, I would guess you get to do this with queens and decent chance with some jacks as well. But Mr. Stefan decides to click it back pretty much, re-raising out of position to 280, giving Pedro pretty insane pot odds considering how wet the board is, which is fairly surprising. I doubt that this is a GTO maneuver when you're out of position. Generally, these small raise sizes will sometimes show up in solvers when you're in position and you don't expect your opponent to donk bet the next street, and then you do this, you kind of freeze the action for your opponent. But when you're out of position, you're not freezing anything, you're just giving him good pot odds, and honestly, I think this raise size should have been much, much bigger in theory. I think this is a bit of a blunder. But yeah, Stefan raises small. He's saying, 110, sure, you can have your Jack 10s, your Queen whatevers, maybe you have two pair, maybe you have a straight, but I have something that's going for stacks for sure. 10-9. for sure, maybe something like queen jack or queen 8, presumably, and then some bluffs. So Pedro calls, we get the 6 of clubs river, and Stefan checks. Checking implies, probably, most likely the hand he had was not going for stacks. Probably giving up, and in this kind of node, when you're being very polarized, out of position, kind of piling in lots of money, and then the river's a brick, and you just slow down. The way this spot plays strategically is that once you've kind of slowed down and waved the white flag, you're going to be check folding a lot, right? It's some huge overfold because really you're just going to have a bunch of give ups in this range. Of course, you will have a few hands with showdown value though. Imagine, for example, Stefan somehow gets here with 6-5 of hearts. So he does beat bluffs, and you do want to call those hands sometimes. And to back those up, you usually trap a little bit, but for the most part, you're just going to have something like king 9 of spades and be always folding, just how the dynamics of the spot play. So Stefan checks, Pedro decides to shove, 1.5x spot, in kind of disregard for the dynamics of the spot, I must say. If you have a straight, this makes sense, or really high set, but you can't go too thin with this size. And since Stefan's range is kind of traps that might check raise you anyway, and then silly bluff catchers and then folds, I'm not sure this is even the optimal sizing in this spot. I wouldn't be surprised if you're supposed to go smaller. But yeah, Pedro shoves, Stefan calls, and we have a showdown. Pedro shows up with queen 6, which, fine to bet on a flop, fine to raise on a turn. Not 100% of the time with your queens, but definitely fine. And then, do you want to bet river? I think for sure. Do you want to shove? In my estimation, probably not. I feel like this is too weak to be wanting to put all the chips in. I would personally have rather gone for a smaller bet. But, depends what you think about Stefan's ability to kind of trap versus hero call. Stefan, on the other hand, does show up with a call, and the hand is ace of hearts, 9 of clubs, for a big bowl of spew. Now, check calling flop is fine. Not gonna get into the turn donk because I'm not, I haven't studied that as much as Stefan, for sure. I could see it being a thing. I think once you get raised, this is like the most straightforward fold in the world. I think the click back is just Stefan acting on a read or just deciding this is his day to win every pot. We all have those days. Something bad happens or something good happens and we're like, okay guys, this is not the day that you mess with me. Today I'm going to win all the pots. So presumably something like that. So Stefan clicks back with his big spew ball. Pedro calls. And then on the river, when you look at this call and you say, oh, Stefan is really crazy, you have to stop and think a little bit. What does Pedro's range look like? So which hands, presumably, on this board could have raised turn and then call a small 3-bet? So we're going to start out by saying every king 10, and then we're going to add and say every ace 10. Then we're going to add a bunch of spade and heart draws. Mostly unpaired, of course. So, king 9, king 7, king 5, king 3, king deuce. And jack is a pair, so we have to go a bit lower, but pot 9, 7, and 9, 5. So all of these in hearts and spades. And then we have, the various nut flush draws. So ace 9, ace 7, ace 5, ace 3, ace deuce. Hearts and spades. So all of these hands potentially bluff, and of course some of these hands beat ace 9. So there is that. You might make a case that maybe something like 5, 6, 6, 7 suited with a busted draw is bluffing, which also beats Stefan. Let's start with these hands as bluffs. We'll go ahead and add value, which is going to be, 10-9 suited and offsuit, queen, jack, pocket 8s, pocket 4s, apparently queen 6, so if we're going to put queen 6, we might as well put queen 8, something like this. And imagine you're Stefan and you have this giant brain and you're like, counting all the combos, and what do you think? Is this gonna be good or bad? Right? You're facing a 1.5x spot overbet. Means you need to win 40% of the time in order to justify calling. Can you win 40% of the time? Ace of hearts, 9 of clubs. There you go, roughly 40%. And note that we have our opponent, that there are a bunch of assumptions here which presumably maybe Stefan made differently. And if I were kind of going through his head, I might say, you know what? When I click back in the turn, this guy's not going to just call 10-9, he's going to shove 10-9. So we're taking those hands out. And he might say, I think we have to leave the ace-10s in. But maybe he thinks his opponent is not going to stab ace-10 that often, so he takes out some of the ace-10s from the range. Just trying to make it good for Stefan in this instance. Maybe he thinks his opponent might shove 8s sometimes, so we take out 8s. There are some assumptions you can make where this gets good. But even with kind of, naive, not making any big assumptions either way, it wasn't as terrible as it might seem, right? Like this crazy gangster call. Not saying the turn is okay, like the turn is very, very gangster, very, very out of line. But the river call is not as bad and not as crazy as it seems, even if your opponent has every ace-10 and bets it. This is a spot where he might be easily going too much if he doesn't bet thin enough for value, so not as bad of a spot as it seems. Okay, that's it for this video. Unfortunately, the very high stakes hands are few and far between this month due to the World Series and all that stuff going on. But always a pleasure to learn from one of the best and most creative minds in poker. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.